Okay, we've all been there, right? You take one of those online personality quizzes, you eagerly wait for the results to load, and then you just feel this sudden knot in your stomach. It's almost like you somehow failed at being you. Or maybe you just felt totally boxed in, like your entire complex human existence was reduced to a single color or some four-letter acronym. Well, let's dive into this, because today we are completely dismantling that anxiety-inducing pass or fail mentality once and for all.
Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're demystifying the IPIP NEO personality assessment. Now, we're pulling this absolutely fascinating framework directly from Thomas Elathea's incredibly comprehensive book, 12 Steps to a Good Life, The Hero's Journey Through Knowledge and Wisdom. It's this massive, detailed guide to personal transformation, and embedded right there in its core, specifically in the section on self-knowledge, is this powerful, clinical-grade psychological tool. It's not a judgment. It's meant to be a literal map for your own personal journey.
So, here is our roadmap for today. We'll start by moving beyond the magazine quizzes. Then we'll meet the big 5 traits, unpack the paradigm shift of neutral scores, explore the power of granularity, and finally, we'll talk about mapping your own hero's journey.
All right, part 1, Beyond the Magazine Quiz. We're looking at what actually makes a clinical-grade inventory.
We need to establish right out of the gate that this is definitely not your typical "which type of sandwich are you" internet quiz. Instead, this assessment maps your behavior by asking you exactly 120 specific questions. You rate phrases like "make friends easily" or "worry about things" on a very strict 1 to 5 scale, and every single statement you answer actually affects your score. It is a rigorous, objective look at your psychological makeup, not just a quick hit of afternoon entertainment.
But, and this is absolutely crucial, we have a grounded reality check from the author here. He explicitly notes that scores and descriptions can only approximate an individual's actual personality. So even a 120-question clinical test is just a map. It's a highly detailed map for sure, but it is not the territory itself. It isn't your absolute unchangeable identity. It's simply the starting point for understanding yourself a whole lot better.
Moving into Section 2, Meet the Big 5, the ocean of human behavior.
So this is the macro-level view. It's the actual foundation of how the scientific community measures personality today. These 5 major domains form the entire architecture of the assessment, and they're usually remembered by the really handy acronym OCEAN. That stands for openness to experience, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. The whole idea here is that everyone, literally everywhere in the world, falls somewhere on the spectrum for each of these 5 broad traits.
Let's zoom in on just one of these to see how incredibly clinical these definitions actually are. Take conscientiousness. It isn't just a fancy word for being a hard worker or a perfectionist. Scientifically, it's defined as the way in which we control, regulate, and direct our impulses, acting with prudence and cautiousness. It's fundamentally linked to intelligence and future planning. You know, things like actually considering the consequences before you just act on a random urge. That is so much more precise and useful than standard self-help jargon, right?
Okay, Section 3, no good or bad scores. This brings us to a massive paradigm shift.
Honestly, this is probably the most liberating part of the entire framework. We are completely removing moral judgment. The author points out that low, average, and high scores are neither absolutely good nor bad. Really let that sink in for a second. You literally cannot score poorly here. A specific trait might be super helpful for one particular task and totally detrimental for another, but it is fundamentally neutral when it comes to your actual worth as a person.
Let's ground this in the real world. Psychologists often view high openness, so being really imaginative and intellectually curious, as a sign of maturity, and that specific cognitive style serves a university professor incredibly well. But the data shows something fascinating. Closed thinking, which means preferring straightforward practical routines and generally resisting ambiguity, is actually statistically related to superior job performance in police work and sales. Neither one is morally better, they are just different tools for entirely different environments.
Which brings us to Section 4, the power of granularity, where we dive way deeper than those broad labels.
Because, let's face it, just calling yourself an introvert or an extrovert simply isn't enough to truly understand your own motivations. The incredible granularity of the IPIP NEO comes from the fact that it breaks those 5 main traits down into 30 distinct subdomains. That's right, 6 subdomains for each major trait. And that right there is where the real, actionable self-knowledge actually lies.
For example, let's look at extroversion. It doesn't just mean you're generally outgoing. The assessment measures 6 totally different behavioral facets: friendliness, gregariousness, assertiveness, activity level,
excitement-seeking, and cheerfulness.
And here's where it gets fascinating. Because these are totally separate subdomains, you can actually have conflicting scores. You might score super high in excitement-seeking, meaning you love bright lights, you love taking risks, you thrive in the hustle and bustle. But you could simultaneously score really low in friendliness, meaning you don't naturally reach out to form close, intimate relationships. Your personality isn't a single checkbox. It's a complex, highly textured spectrum.
Now, consider neuroticism. That word alone has such a negative stigma attached to it, doesn't it? But breaking it down into subdomains demystifies it completely. It's just measuring anxiety, anger, depression, self-consciousness, immoderation, and vulnerability. It is simply a clinical measure of your emotional reactivity and your tendency to experience negative feelings. Understanding which specific subdomains trigger your reactivity, like are you prone to quick anger, or maybe you default to vulnerability under sudden stress, that is incredibly powerful information for managing your daily life without constantly judging yourself.
Finally, we reach Section 5, Mapping Your Hero's Journey, and the practical application of all this amazing self-knowledge.
So how do we actually apply this to real life? Here is the step-by-step process. Step 1. You answer those 120 questions as honestly as you possibly can. Step 2. You manually score your 30 subdomains so you can see exactly where you stand. Step 3. You observe your own patterns without an ounce of moral judgment. Seriously, you don't beat yourself up for being who you naturally are. And Step 4. You use this highly accurate personal map to navigate the unique challenges and opportunities of your own life.
This really gets down to the core philosophy of Thomas Alethea's work. A realistic self-inventory is literally the mandatory first step to a good life. You simply cannot manage your life without an accurate, honest map of who you are. So much of our pain results from a mismatch between reality and our perception of it. And taking this test, well, it gives you a massive, incredibly helpful dose of reality.
So I want to leave you with this provocative thought today. What happens if you stop viewing your personality traits as flaws that somehow need to be fixed, and you start viewing them as completely neutral tools in your toolkit? Think about it. If your traits aren't flaws, how will you use them on your journey? Map your terrain, embrace who you actually are, and use that knowledge to build a better life.